What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel, and welcome back to the From Computer to Cardboard series. In this first season, we are working on the game Against the Storm, which is like a big fantasy city building type game. We've already gone through and done a lot of the actual game design itself, and now we are building the prototype. On the screen, I'm going to be running through some B-roll of me working through all the Photoshop stuff, kind of like a montage type thing. You can see me building out all the cards, which is going to result in a print sheet that looks something like this. I have 9 of the poker-sized cards on there, and then the second half of the B-roll is going to be me going through and guillotining all the different cards together so that I can sleeve them up and we can actually go and play them, because we have a playtesting event up and coming where I'll get a chance to show off and play the game, get some feedback, and that's going to be kind of the conclusion of the series. We're near the end. The idea is to build the game, play it, get some ideas on how playable it is, get some actionable feedback, and then maybe do a, hey, what would I change? What would the kind of next steps look like? Because the idea for this series is to go through and make as much of this series about like all of the exact steps that it takes to go from concept to completion. Because a lot of people have a board game that just lives in their head forever, and I kind of want to show you what I'm doing, how I'm building it, how I'm making stuff come to life. And so stuff like having the print sheet, building everything together is an important part of it. It is part of how it all comes together. But there's only so much that I can talk about when it comes to the actual Photoshop and the guillotine. Guillotining is just the same thing 9 times in a row. I'm just making cuts. And in the previous episode, we talked a lot about how the Photoshop is done and some of the ideas and like how that all comes together and the print sheets and stuff like that. So you're going to see it all happening up in the background here. And instead of me going through that and remarking upon what's happening, that's just going to be some nice B-roll for you to follow while I actually walk through what is the current finalized rules of the game. We're going to talk about the exact how to play for everything, because I have like a 5-page document now that I have open in front of me here. You can hear me scrolling, of exactly how to play and how it's going to be run basically at the playtesting event. Is by then I'm going to be completely blank. I will have forgotten everything or the ideas that I had, because we're a few weeks into this series now, right? I'll have completely forgotten everything, and I'm just going to be reading off the sheet and explaining it to the other person, and then kind of trying my best to simulate running and playing the game. And I'll be taking notes as to things that went wrong or stuff that I want to change and stuff like that as well. And one of the other things that I did want to mention before I get a bit into the rules is that the way that I've built the prototype for the game is that every single component is a card, with the exception of the cubes needed. But that's it. I got some special cubes that like stick together. They have they're called linking cubes, which you'll see in the next video if you watch for the playtest. And we're going to stick to them together. That's going to be a meeple, because I couldn't get enough meeples that I needed. And then the rest is just going to be like tracking resources and stuff like that. So really, the game is just cards and cubes. And the goal behind this is making a minimum viable product. MVP is like a really common thing, but normally that's like a manufacturing thing for testing and stuff like that. In this case, it's literally just seeing it work and the mechanics. It doesn't need to be polished. It doesn't need to be looking pretty. And then what I would have actually done for a lot of these components is make tiles. When I prototype for tiles, I still print out the same as if it was a card, except I glue it to cardboard, and I normally have cardboard on hand, but I currently don't. So I'm like, well, I can just make it a card instead. That's going to be a bit easier. And maybe some actual like bigger player boards. I had some ideas about when you purchase buildings from the shop, you actually get a tile and you're building it like a little village. But because it's a table presence thing and not a gameplay thing, I don't think it's worthwhile for what is basically just a mechanical play test. Everything at this point and for the first play test really should just be a mechanical play test. And then once you're getting a little bit confident with how the game is playing, you can start switching out components, getting it a little bit closer to the final vision, so that people can kind of start aligning and seeing, what it is, and maybe spend some more time remarking on how it looks visually. But the only thing I'm interested in for this series specifically is, getting to that first play test, getting it played, going, yeah, this maybe does feel like a video game or whatever, and then moving on from there. Now, let's get into it. Let's get into how to play the Against the Storm board game. First thing, setting up. So each player selects a species between beavers, lizards, and harpies. This means that stuff like frogs and humans and foxes, and if I'm missing a race, whatever the last one is, are not included. We ended up cutting down to having just the 3. You then receive 10 meeples, 38 resource reference cards, and the matching starting deck, which I think is 7 cards. So you're going to have a small starting deck. Think like a deck builder. We have a starting deck, which is like a couple of coins, maybe a couple of attacks, kind of like how Star Realms does it. There's like a 1 attack and 8 coins or something like that. Yeah, I think it's 2 attacks and 8 coins. This is something similar to that, where there's just going to be starting resource cards with like the woodcutter's camp, which you can use to collect wood, and then it will kind of escalate from there. There's also a starting shelter card where you're going to use that to track a lot of city builders use housing to determine the maximum number of workers you can have. That's kind of what we've got going on here. So you can have your starting shelter and then your meeples. So you pick out your meeples. Now, once you've done that, you then deal out all of the starting nodes. So the starting nodes is stone, broodmother, reeds, and trees, ashen tree. And so for each of the starting nodes, put 5 yellow cubes on each. Then you set the reputation and impatience track to 0. For this, I just made cards that just says reputation and impatience. We're just going to pile up cubes really big on it because impatience goes up to 50. I do have 50 cubes. And so what I really wanted was like a slider, maybe something like the Azul scoring board where you have like a cube and this is like a large track and the cube slowly moves along the track. But because reputation goes to 50, it has to be kind of a big track. Impatience goes to 50, reputation only goes to 20. So I need 70 spaces on a board somewhere. And I like the idea of that being a board where we can have the tracks on it, but also like some reminder info as well would be kind of nice. But again, because this is just going for minimum viable, it's just polish really. So I have those things separated. So once we've set the reputation and impatience cards on the table somewhere, next is the season tracker. So we start with a drizzle season, and then we have to have clearance season and storm season nearby. When you are in each season, there is a special bonus, which we will get to later. Next is shuffle the buildings deck and deal the top 5 cards out in a line next to it. This is going to be like a deck builder's shop. So like, not like Dominion, more like Ascension. And then shuffle the separate tiers of the Queen's Orders. So there's 3 different tiers of Queen's Orders by the complexity of the goods required. The first tier is like wood and berries and stuff like that, which requires you to deliver more of them, whereas the higher tiers require you to deliver less of them, but they're more complicated to make. There's more steps to go through to make them. So you want the tier 1s on top, then tier 2s underneath, and then tier 3s at the bottom, and you'll flick through them as you go down. So shuffle the separate tiers and then stack them, and then reveal 3 cards from that deck to all players and choose one to be the starting order, and you'll continue to do this until you have 3 order cards chosen. There is enough tier 1 order cards for there to be 3 and discard the rest, and then like a couple more before you start hitting tier 2s and tier 3s. So you should be several orders in by the time you start hitting the higher tiers, which is intended. It's supposed to kind of scale as you play through the game. So that's set up. There's probably some other minor things that I may be forgetting for this, but pretty confident that's most of it. And I might go back and edit things, but this is what I've printed out verbatim for the playtest. So next is on your turn. So draw cards from your deck equal to the number of workers you have, which will be 3 at the start of the game. If you get more workers, you get to draw more cards. Select one of them and play it face up and discard the rest. So for example, I might see Woodcutter's Camp, Trapper's Camp, Trapper's Camp, and I go, well, I want to use Woodcutter's Camp. I keep the Woodcutter's Camp, I discard the other 2. And then I assign one of my unassigned workers to the resource node that matches the selected card. In the Woodcutter's Camp example, I will put a meeple onto the ashen tree, and so that the meeple can be collecting wood. And then I add 1 cube from that resource node to my resource stash. So I would take 1 cube from the wood node, and I'll put that in my wood resource stash, which is going to be like fucking 34 cards, which just says the one specific resource that it makes. Sorry, my curtain is causing a glare on my face weirdly. And so you're going to have like a big area, which is just all the resources and stuff that you have, which will expand over time as things happen. Now, you may spend 1 cube of the water resource that matches the current season to get an additional cube in this way. So we start off in the drizzle season. You can spend 1 drizzle water cube to get an additional node this way. And then there's additional season bonuses, which we'll get to later. But this is just always, you can if the rainwater collector basically means that you can double up on other stuff by spending the rainwater node. So if you have like not a good choice right now, you can instead collect water and then use water to do other stuff later. Like water is not quite a wild. There's like a cycle of Magic the Gathering lands similar to, I mean, Shimmering Grotto is one that comes to mind, but it's like pay 1, tap. This thing makes something of any color. So it's like your -1 total mana that you could have, but it becomes whichever color you need. That's kind of the vibe that we're going for here with this specific mechanic, where you can spend water to get extra stuff that you need as you make it. All right, so next, still on your turn. You may then purchase any buildings from the shop by paying their construction cost, which is at the top left. If I bring back my sheet, I do actually have some examples here. So we can see this Alchemist Hut, which is 2 leather, 0 wooden planks, 3 bricks. That is the construction cost referenced. And then you add the applicable resource nodes that it could create. So for example, if you buy a tinctuary, the tinctuary makes wine and ale. You would create a wine and ale node to, you know, for example, where we have our wood and our reeds and stuff, that is going to have resource nodes added to it whenever we purchase a building that has the capacity to create those resources. But it's created with no cubes on it, unlike the natural resource nodes, which start with 5. We'll get back to that in a second. Then when you purchase the building, instead of going to discard pile like most deck builders, it gets shuffled into a deck. Okay. At any time during your turn, you may move resources from your stash to the Queen's Order cards. The Queen's Order card has the required amount of cubes on it. It's removed. You get +1 to reputation. And then all players choose a building card from the shop and shuffle it into their deck without paying the cost. Then a new order is chosen immediately. In the same way, you'll reveal the 3, you'll pick one, you'll discard the rest. If you cannot draw a card from your deck, shuffle your discard pile back and then draw. Then you pass the turn to the next player, and this repeats. So basically, you rip the 3 cards, or however many workers you have, you pick one, you assign a worker to that thing, and then that resource is added to your stash. And then this repeats until all players have assigned all workers. So you will see where all of the workers are, and this is how a season works. Once all the workers have been assigned, no one else has any actions left, because some people might have more workers than others. No one has any actions left. Then the season ends, we move to the next season. All the things are complete, all the workers come back. So, at the round end, each season is a single round of each player's turns until no player have any remaining unassigned workers. The seasons progress in this order, same as the video game: Drizzle, Clearance, Storm. After the Storm season, there is specific year-end actions. But for the minute, once the season ends, All players return their workers and may spend 1 food of any type to feed them. Each cube of food can feed 5 workers. So if you have 3 guys, you spend 1 cube and that will feed them all. Any unfed worker adds 1 impatient point. So if you don't feed them at all, you will gain 3 impatience points because you start off with 3 workers, and that will slowly start to accumulate. You can then also fulfill any complex needs for your workers. We'll get into this in a little bit, but this is stuff like the need for luxury, the need for leisure, and so on. All basic nodes reset to 5 cubes from the supply. So for example, Ashen Tree will go back to 5, which means that in a 2-player game, we start off with 3 workers each. You have 6 workers. You can't get 6 wood. The maximum you can get is 5 wood. And basically, it's to help encourage you to spread out the things that you're getting rather than just getting the 1 resource over and over again. And the cards in the deck are supposed to limit how you can do that as well. But it's also to stop other players from specifically doubling up on things that you're doing a little bit too much as well. And maybe 5 is too big a number. But because the game is designed to be 2 or 3 players, I think 5 is fine. Because when you have 9, and you could actually get kind of close to 5, it's like a little bit more closer to halfway. But I think it's fine. But yeah, all the basic nodes reset to 5. You add 1 impatience cube to all of the chosen queen's orders. So you'll always have 3 active. And then for the ones that you haven't completed, when the season ends, they get 1 impatience cube. And then you add impatience points equal to the total number of impatience cubes. So let's say you have 0 impatience points. The season ends, all of the cubes get +1, then you get 3 impatience points. That's why the number is so high. That's why the number is 50 to get you to lose the game. Now, let's say the second season, we still haven't completed any of these orders. They'll get a second cube, you get 6 impatience points. So it does accumulate pretty quickly if you're not on it and trying to solve the things. Because the Queen's Impatience is the main mechanic that you're racing against, it makes sense for it to kind of be speedy, really. In a 2-player game, I don't think that you should have really any difficulty in clearing out the orders, or at least clearing 2 of the 3 orders each season. So I think it should be fine. But we'll see. That's a thing for playtesting. It might mean that in a 3-player game that this works fine, but in a 2-player game, we need to adjust it to be more forgiving. And that's fine. And then the last thing, you move the season marker to the next season, revealing any complications from the storm season at this time, which we'll get into in a second. So let's go through the different seasons. We've got the drizzle season, which means that rain collectors collect drizzle water. Rain collectors will always collect the water type that matches the season that's happening currently. But additionally, in the drizzle season, once per season, you may choose 1 basic resource node to gain +1 resource when harvesting. So this is independent of spending water to get an additional one. So you could spend a water to get an additional one, and also use the season bonus to get an extra one. So I'm getting wood, but I'm getting 3 this time. And because you're taking 3 nodes from it, that means that that 5 cap could get depleted much quicker. And so that's drizzle season. The next one is clearance season, where the rain collectors collect clearance water. But once per season, you may choose 1 complex food to gain +1 resource from when harvesting. So it's everything that's combined beyond 1 stage. So berries, which you harvest from the reeds, is not a complex food, but pie, for example, is. So you could get 2 pies instead of 1. And then the storm season. So rain collectors collect stormwater on becoming the first storm season of the 3rd year. So not the first storm, not the second storm, the 3rd storm. And every subsequent year, a plague is revealed and its negative effects either resolve immediately or are applied for the duration of that storm season. Some examples of this is some of the food gets eaten by rats, some of your workers experience fatigue and you can't use them. It's stuff that just kind of slow you down a little bit. The storm season is supposed to be the scary season where stuff gets tougher. Alright, next is buying shelters. Shelters are not shuffled into your deck when purchased from the shop. Place them to the side near your resource stash. When a big shot is purchased, all players receive an additional worker. And when a species-specific shot is purchased, that species-specific player receives an additional worker, regardless of who played it. So if I'm the Harpies player and I buy a beaver house, the beaver player will get an additional worker. If no player is the species matching the purchased shelter, then the purchasing player gains an extra worker. If I'm playing 2 players, there's no beaver player, I buy the beaver shelter, I will get an extra worker. Next is empty nodes. So, like before, when we buy the tincture, we will add the wine and ale nodes, but they have no cubes on it. What happens? When a player purchases a new building from the shop and it is added to their deck, a node is added with no cubes on it. At this time, the player may wish to spend any amount of the crafting resources required to add cubes to that node. For example, after purchasing a smelter, the nodes for pie, training gear, and copper bars are added. The purchasing player may then spend any amount of their stored resources that combine to make these nodes to populate those nodes with cubes. So to add 3 cubes to the pie node, you would need to spend 3 flour and any combination of 3 meat or berries. If a player uses the smelter card later to harvest from a node the smelter creates, but the nodes are empty, that player may assign an additional worker to convert all of the required resources to combine and populate the node, same as above. That player may also choose to instead spend 1 stored water of the matching season type instead of using a second worker. So basically, one guy has to make all the pies, and then one guy has to, harvest them from the nodes. But instead, you can use your water source to be able to do that. And as you get more and more workers, this is going to make more sense for some of the more complex things. And it also means that water is relevant throughout the entire game, whereas maybe wood cutting might fall off or whatever. That's empty nodes, because you have to craft the thing. If I buy a tincture, it doesn't mean that I just get wine immediately. I might not have the required, I might not have berries and barrels to be able to make the wine. So I go, well, okay, I need to find a thing that's going to make me barrels so that I do have the required ingredients. And that's going to, moving up the tech tree is going to change how you choose what you're going to be building. So next is creating trade goods. Now, trade goods is the type of good that the highest tier of Queen's orders is. So it starts off with basic resources, then it goes complex resources, and then it goes trade goods. So pack of trade goods, pack of luxury goods, pack of building materials, and provisions can all be created from any starter building. That is a building that does not have the purchase cost on the top left. It starts in any of the specific players' decks. By paying 3 cubes in any combination of the listed resources. So on the pack of goods reminder card, it will say the full list of things that can be put into that pack of goods, and you can pay any combination of those 3 things using a starter building to create a pack of goods, which is always specifically for populating the Queen's orders of the more complicated ones. Okay, now we're getting into some scoring and winning the game. We've already figured out how to get reputation by completing the Queen's orders, where every Queen's order will give you 1 reputation, and you need to get to 20 reputation in order to win, to not lose to the Queen's impatience. Now, the primary way to gain reputation is to complete the Queen's orders by fulfilling the goods requested. The second way to gain reputation is through resolve boosting activities. Each species has a specific list of things that they appreciate and will give them happiness. Complex foods, as below, when fed to your workers at the season end step, will give 1 reputation point. Each complex food good spent represents 5 workers for 1 reputation point. So if I have 10 workers and I spend the 2 food to feed all 10, I'll get 2 reputation points, but everything below that will only ever give 1. You can spend complex food of multiple types for additional points, but not multiples of the same food per worker per season. So if I have pie and skewers, I can feed them all pie and skewers for extra reputation, but I can't double up on pie. And so then I have a list of which foods are preferred by which race. I have a reminder card which has the full list of things that each race likes. That's going to come with basically your starter pack for the species you're playing as. But harpies likes paste and jerky, lizards likes pie, jerky, pickled goods, and skewers, and beavers likes biscuits and pickled goods. This all matches the exact preferences of the species in Against the Storm, the video game. This has not been changed. So most of how the tech tree and stuff works is exactly the same as the video game. Very rarely have I had to change things for balancing. Next is complex needs. In the same way as feeding your workers at season end, you may spend 1 point of the following resource to satisfy 5 workers for 1 reputation point. This is exactly the same as food, except it's a more complicated resource. We are looking at harpies enjoying education and treatment, lizards preferring brawling, and beavers liking education, leisure, and luxury. And so, for example, the tavern creates leisure, and then you can spend leisure on the beavers the same way that we spend complex food to gain reputation points. All right. Complex workwear needs is exactly the same as feeding your workers, where harpies likes clothing and boots, lizards likes boots, beavers likes clothing. And then finally, the only one that is slightly different, which is complex housing needs. Now, they are shelters built that match the specific species. So, for example, harpy house for a harpy. If you have a species-specific shelter that matches the species you are playing, at year end, it provides 1 reputation point. So at the end of each year, you'll count up all of your harpy houses and go, well, this is going to give me this many points. All right, next is trading. Players may trade resources with each other at any time, but must receive something in exchange immediately. This includes cubes, shelters, and the cards in the deck. So I could purchase a building that is better helpful to another player, and I can trade them for something. Trade them for resources, trade them for cubes, whatever. I like the idea of being able to trade because it is a co-op game, but I don't want to encourage quarterbacking where one guy goes, I'm going to just give you everything and I'll have nothing. My deck would just make wood. I'm the wood guy. All I'm going to do is make wood. I'm going to give you everything that I do. I don't want to encourage that. I kind of like what we have going on here. And then the last thing is winning the game. The ultimate goal of the game is to receive 20 reputation points to impress the queen. So whenever the 20th reputation point is added to the track, the game ends and all players win. However, the game is lost if the queen's impatience track reaches 50 points, resulting in all players losing. That's it. That is the whole rules document. I'm looking forward to playtesting this. We have Tabletop Tuesday coming up, which is the Sydney regular playtest event, where, as you can see, I am currently guillotining everything and cutting it up and getting it all together and ready. Once that's done, we are going to sleeve everything up. We're going to bring it into the city. We're going to play some games and see if it actually works. It is a very big game. It's almost 300 cards. It's like 240 or something. Because there's lots of different decks, there's lots of different moving pieces, there's lots of just like reminder sections which should be player boards, but are not, because making cards is easier than making boards for me, and it's easy to print them out and put them together and all that. So that's the main thing, and that's it so far. So if you're excited to see what this looks like when it's getting playtested, and actually see the game get played, and maybe hear what the playtester feedback is, stick around. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, allow the algorithm gods to bless you with more content about the Against the Storm board game. But I will have a playlist on the screen for the entire From Computer to Cardboard series, where you'll be able to go look at the very beginning and see the progression of the journey to get up until this point where we build the game. And you can find out everything and see what the process is like for me when it comes to building board games from an interesting inspiration angle. I will also have just a random video on the screen because there's other cool stuff we do on the channel that's worth checking out. And as always, the subscribe button right up on there. It's just looking so clickable today. And then stick around because next week you'll get to see the game get played. And look, I'm really excited for that. And I hope that you are too. So we will see you then.